Hi there, this is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and today I have the pleasure of hosting a webinar, Safe Zone Allies at Walden University. Our presenters are from the School of Counseling, and we have Dr. Kathy Cooley and Dr. Lee Tufel-Prida. But before they start presenting today, I would like to take a moment to go over some of the technical details of Adobe. As you can see, the main slide is located in the middle of the screen. That's where most of the information is presented today. You can see your colleagues on the line to the right. It's a small group today, so we're really excited about some great chat that we can have. We've also included some files on the lower right-hand side as well. And those, if you just click on them, you can download them and then have them for your records. Also on the left, today's captionist, Christy from Paradigm, is here, and she'll be recording the session as well. And there is a chat box, as you can see, so please feel free to enter questions, make comments, or since it is such a small group today, you can just chime in verbally as well, because I have not muted the lines. If you have any questions throughout that maybe you just don't want to interrupt, but you want everyone to know you have a question, you can use the raise hand function at the upper part of your screen. If you need us to speak louder, maybe slow down, or you just want to give Kathy or Lee a hand of applause, you can do that as well. And lastly, if you should encounter any technical difficulties, there's a help button, and if you click on that, that gives you a wealth of information to hopefully solve any issues you may encounter. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kathy Cooley.
Thank you, Lita, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a great pleasure to have all of you joining us for this initial discussion on safe zones at Walden. And it's exciting to see the interest we've had in this introductory Ally webinar. So thank you for being with us today. I'm going to briefly go over our training objectives for today. And our hope is that we'll be able to briefly examine some internalized oppression and prejudice against the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer questioning community, and possibly learn how to respond or advocate in certain situations an ally might encounter. And being that yesterday was National Coming Out Day and we're in LGBTQ History Month, I can't think of a better time to begin addressing these potential scenarios and talking about some of the issues that this community is affected with. At this point, I am going to turn it over to Lee.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. And I want to thank all of you for being here with us today. And again, really highlight the importance of what yesterday was about. Yesterday was National Coming Out Day. And today, as we talk about safe zones and becoming a safe zone ally, coming out is a process, right? And as we talk about the mission of safe zones, hopefully we'll get a better understanding of the importance of what yesterday was, and also the importance of what brought forward our conversation today and our training. As I discuss what mission I'm showing here and the mission that Kathy and I are presenting, please really understand that this is a work in progress. That this mission statement is something that's very fluid, that's something that we're actively engaging in as a process, something that we would like to work on with those of you in the training, with those of you in the Walden community that actively would like to see safe zones and more community for the LGBTQ community here at Walden. So briefly, what we're kind of proposing at this moment as a mission statement is that Safe Zone Allies at Walden University are a group of faculty, staff, and leaders who are committed, supporting, and celebrating, and advocating with on behalf of the LGBTQ community at Walden University. And allies will promote a positive working and learning environment for LGBTQ colleagues and students alike by respectfully standing against homophobic and heterosexist comments or actions, both in the online setting and live, work, and learning environments by respectfully informing and educating others. That's our current kind of working statement and mission. And I just really want to pause here for a moment and talk about what prompted us being here today? When the tragedy happened in Orlando, our faculty group in the Marriage, Couple, and Family Counseling Department was really struck by what could we do. And so we looked at Walden and we thought, what services are there? Where is our community? And this was one way that we thought there's a gap. And how can we build community? How can we step out? And this is one way that we're actively trying to do something. I'm going to pause there and see if there's any thoughts or questions or what resonates for you about the mission statement. Or I'll leave it on that screen. Any questions or thoughts about that mission statement?
I really like the depth and the breadth of the mission statement and the idea that it's promoting and creating a positive working and learning environment for both faculty, for staff, for administration, for students, for the entire Walden community.
Thank you for that. Again, I agree with you. I like that we really do want to be inclusive of everyone, and that it's not just about faculty or just about students. That we really want to include everybody in that, and online and in work, right? So looking at what does it look like to be an ally, and what does it mean to be a person who's an ally to the LGBTQ community? And so I'm going to talk just a little bit broadly about what that means. And I'm going to give you some definitions, and then we can talk about it. So an ally is a person who works toward combating homophobia, biphobia, which is fear of bisexual persons, and heterosexism, which is preferential treatment of heterosexuals on both a personal and institutional level. And another potential definition of what an ally might be is a person who is a member of a dominant or majority group who works in his or her professional and personal life to support and defend efforts to end oppression for an oppressed group. And so I threw out some terms there, homophobia, biphobia, heterosexism, and we're even using terms like LGBTQ and throwing out acronyms, and sometimes I take for granted that I understand these terms. So you'll notice that in the files on the lower lower right-hand corner of your screen, and once this session is over, you'll have access to these files. I've included a list of essential terms, and then also an essential terms full list of terms of all the common terms that are often used in the LGBTQ community that sometimes we don't fully understand or know the terminology. And I think it's important as we work toward becoming allies and advocates that we get a working knowledge and knowledge base of the language. And I have to be honest that even as much as I work to really fully understand the language and the terminology, this is kind of a moving target. And just like the dictionary and the English language, it's something that's ever evolving, and I think we have to make an effort to really fully understand what we're saying and how we're saying it. So the terms that I'm sharing with you today, please know that that's a work in progress. And as you work to become an ally and an advocate, that you almost have to regularly engage in that continuing education about how you use your language and how you express and describe to whom you're working with and what's going on in the community. And so some other ways that you may want to discuss or describe what an ally is. An ally really strives to be a friend, a listener, a person who is open-minded, a person who has their own opinions but is willing to talk, someone who recognizes their own personal boundaries but joins with others with a common purpose. Someone who really believes that all persons, regardless of age, sex, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, should be treated with dignity and respect. Somebody that's an ally really confronts their own prejudice, really engages in the process of developing a culture free of homophobia, transphobia, and heterosexism. An ally also really recognizes their mistakes, but it does not use them as an excuse for inaction. An ally really is responsible for empowering their role in the community, particularly as it relates to responding to homophobia and transphobia. Also, this type of person supports an ally program at their university or workplace and really commits themselves to personal growth in spite of discomfort that it might cause. So as I've described here what becoming an ally might look like or what being an ally is, as Kathy and I kind of developed this training, we really were hoping that there may be some positive effects becoming an ally for faculty, for staff, for leadership, for the community at large here for Walden. And so some of the things that may be positive, to become an ally might be increased communication with LGBTQ students, increased awareness about LGBTQ issues, increased desire for more information about LGBTQ issues, an opportunity to express your beliefs and values, an opportunity to help others on campus, including individuals from other minorities groups. And I really wanted to share here for a moment that, and I'm going to type some of this in as Kathy speaks, is that there really is a need to become an ally and for Safe Zone. That when we look at our workplace and when we look at our school, there's a great deal of statistics to support that students and persons in the LGBTQ community do experience harassment and do experience significant challenges. So, for example, 74% of LGBTQ students experienced harassment at school this past year. And more than half of LGBTQ students felt unsafe because of their sexual orientation. And when it relates to the workplace, 62% of LGBTQ employees report hearing jokes about lesbians and gays in the workplace. 53% of LGBTQ employees hide who they are at work. And 20% of LGBTQ employees report looking for another job, specifically because their workplace environment wasn't accepting of LGBTQ individuals. So we have a huge opportunity to help people feel safe by being allies. Kathy?
Thanks, Lee. Before we move on to this model that I have pulled up here, I wanted to briefly just ask you all, as you think about what an ally is, what an ally does, and our role as advocates, can you think of any reasons why someone might be discouraged to become an ally or advocate?
Well, sadly, I think that people are afraid to be allies, and I have a question follow-up to this, but I think people are afraid because people might think they're part of the LGBTQ community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, that's certainly one of them. Anyone else?
And I would agree with that. There's a question slide that comes up later on in our presentation, and Kathy and I frequently share that after years of doing this training, we regularly experience judgment and bias because of being the trainers of people for safe zones, for the LGBT community, for being advocates. We're regularly made assumptions of our own sexuality, our own gender identity because of our work and the things that we do for the LGBT community.
Any other ideas?
And what was your question before we move on?
Sure. So, I think there's been the assumption, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think there's an assumption out there that only heterosexual identified folks can be allies. Mm-hmm. And one of the wonderful things I think about this training and the way you're presenting it and the depth and breadth of it is that as a lesbian, I can be an ally too. It's not mutually exclusive.
Yes, and that was actually my next point because someone brought this up yesterday and needed clarification. An ally is not just someone who's heterosexual. It can be anyone that identifies in any way. And oftentimes you'll see that Safe Zone programs, the Safe Zone advisory councils, they will have individuals that are gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, questioning, because without those voices, it's hard for those who are heterosexual to advocate and have a place to begin their ally work. We need input from the community. So that is a misconception, and I'm glad that you brought that up so that we can clarify that here for those attending today. Because anyone and everyone can become an ally as long as you're willing to do the work. And that's one of the other factors that really discourages advocacy is it is work, and there will be confrontations possibly. I know I've been in positions where whether I was applying to work at a Catholic university, seeing that on my vita that I was an ally came into question, and you have to be willing and ready to have those discussions and really put the action behind your beliefs in supporting this community. So I appreciate your input there. Any other ideas before I move on?
And Kathy, the other thing that came up with that is that often persons that are in positions of privilege, be it heterosexist position of privilege, often do have an opportunity to do work that that the privilege allows them to do. So there is that opportunity as well, that it's important to speak when you're an ally and you are in a position of privilege. So having that to work with is important to speak to as well. So everybody that's in the ally group, in the Safe Zone group, everybody bringing their story, be it complex, needs to work through the stages of addressing their own identity development. And so that's going to be different for every person depending on what they're bringing to the table with their own sexual identity and their own gender identity.
Yes. Absolutely. And I'm going to speak briefly about Vivian Cass's model of sexual identity, and I'm bringing it up because part of becoming an ally and supporting the LGBTQ community requires some knowledge of sexual identity development. Later we're going to look at ally identity development briefly, and while there are a number of different identity models, Cass's is really the one that's most referenced, but I would encourage everyone to get out there in the literature. I mean, there are additional models that have been developed that have different flow and have different phases. So I encourage you to look those up, and I do have a list. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to share that as well. But these stages that are listed here really help explain what LGBTQ students, colleagues might be thinking, might be feeling. It might explain some of their behaviors and help us know how to better support them. So if we look at these, and I'm going to fly through this because I'm realizing what time it is. If we're looking at the first phase, identity confusion, this is where an individual might be asking, could I be gay? Okay, it's their very first awareness of gay or lesbian thoughts, feelings, attractions. The task here is to accept, deny, or reject who they are. And some of the possible responses that we see at this phase is avoidance of information regarding the LGBTQ community. Behaviors might be inhibited. They may try and keep emotional involvement pretty much separate from sexual contact. Some possible needs here might be to explore some internal positive or negative judgments. And then as they move through this confusion stage, they can either stop there and stay there, or they can move towards identity comparison. And in this second stage, they begin thinking, maybe this does apply to me. This is where they begin to accept the possibility of being gay or lesbian and examining the wider implications of that potential commitment. And the task at that phase, according to Cass's model specifically, is to deal with social alienation. So some possible responses at this phase would be to maybe grieve some of the losses and the things that he or she might have to give up by embracing their sexual orientation. They might even accept homosexual definitions of behavior, but still identify as heterosexual. So here it would be really important that the person develop their own definition of identity. And again, as with all these phases, the individual can stay stuck in that phase, or they can move forward into the next phase. And what we see is there are other models where there can be overlap, they could be cyclical, they can move backwards into a phase depending on life experiences. But with this particular phase, they would move towards identity tolerance. And at that third phase, their thoughts are, I'm not the only one. And this is really where they begin to seek out other gay and lesbian individuals. This helps to decrease social alienation by becoming part of groups that support the LGBTQ community. And then a possible response here would be to begin to have language to talk and think about LGBTQ issues. And the needs that they may have at this stage would be to be supported in really exploring possibly some feelings of shame they may have derived from heterosexism in our community, as well as internal heterosexism from their upbringing. From there, they would move into the next phase, identity acceptance, and that's where they begin to think, I'm going to be okay. There's a positive connotation attached to his or her gay or lesbian identity, and they begin to accept rather than just tolerate it. The task here is to deal with that inner tension of no longer subscribing to societal norms and attempting to bring some congruence between, the private view of self and then their public view of who they are. Here they would obviously accept, gay or lesbian identification, the gay lifestyle. They would need to continue exploring grief and loss as well during this phase. And from there, they would move into identity pride. And that's where the thought begins to occur that they've got to let people know who they are. The task here is dealing with the incongruent views of heterosexuals, and their responses might be to split the world into gay being good and straight being bad. They may have a disclosure crisis as they become kind of less willing to really blend in. Their needs here might be to receive support for exploring different feelings, different issues like anger issues they may have, issues regarding heterosexism. And then they would move into the final phase, identity synthesis. And here's where the individual really begins to integrate their sexual identity with all other aspects of themselves. And sexual orientation becomes only one aspect of self rather than their entire identity. Here, that integration is obviously the main task. And individuals may continue to be angry at heterosexism, but with decreased intensity. And at this phase, they're more able to trust others. And as they integrate the different aspects of who they are into their defined self, it's okay to move out into the community and begin advocating even for their LGBT population. So I wanted to briefly go over that model, and you'll see some parallels as we talk about ally identity development a little bit later. But I wanted to pause to briefly go over some of our values and just ask some quick questions here to get us thinking about some of our biases and some of the messages that we've received from society. And the first one here is, do you ever not do something because others may think it makes you look gay or lesbian? Another question, how would you feel if you had an LGBTQ child? Would you suggest that a person see a therapist if they came out to you? Or have you ever laughed at any homophobic or transphobic jokes? An example of that would be someone indicating that their child's swim coach seems a little bit gay, or, well, that's a good example. And they would laugh it off saying, well, I'm not going to let my child swim on the swim team this year. So any of these give you a negative response or positive response? And feel free to write in the chat if you're not comfortable sharing.
And also, we'll try to do the Vegas rule here, so slightly modified. What is said here stays here. But if you've learned something, I really encourage you to leave here with it and the information that you're learning about yourself or what's being shared. And it's kind of calling back what I was sharing earlier about Kathy and I doing the training. That really speaks to number one.
I see someone typing, and I'll share briefly. When I first became an ally, I had to overcome a lot of my biases from childhood. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and there were a lot of negative messages sent about the LGBTQ community at the time, at least in my family and my upbringing. And when I first joined, I remember having a lot of fears about what other people would think of me. Would they think that I'm a lesbian? And that was very concerning for me at the time. And it wasn't until I really sat in these trainings for a long while and had deep discussions with other individuals that I was able to explore that a bit. And then once I joined that Catholic university that I worked for, it didn't matter anymore. And I went 3 years working there with everyone thinking that I was a lesbian. And that was okay. But it was a long journey to get there. Because I was afraid of the repercussions. I was afraid of continued discrimination against me. So it's understandable why some individuals would have fears or feel discouraged or have concerns about being an ally. And I'm seeing some responses pop up here. Let me see. Christy, you've mentioned that if your child was LGBTQ, you would feel worried about how they would be accepted in society, possibly teased in school, but as a parent you would do your best to support her and make it clear that her family loves her just the same. And those are valid concerns. When we look at the research and we see some of the reasons that folks don't come out, there is a lot of rejection. There is gossip, especially for students. There's harassment, there's abuse. I can remember as a counselor working with a teenage male who identified as gay, and he had braces ripped out of his teeth by a group of guys that bullied him at the school bus stop just because he looked gay, and he hadn't even come out yet. So those are valid concerns. And there's a host of other issues specific to our college students at Walden, losing their jobs, financial support from their parents, physical violence that they may encounter. But thanks, Christy. Thanks for sharing that. And let's see, Hillary, you've mentioned that number one might apply to you as a teen, but not now, probably a product of the time in your own personal development. And yeah, that is, identity development has a lot to do with that and the experiences that we have throughout our life and how those influence and shape us. Certainly. Thank you. Okay. Let me just find myself here. I'm going to move past this and move on to advocacy competency. As we advocate, there are different models of advocacy, and being that I'm in the counseling profession, this is the one that I typically follow when I'm working with students or clients alike. I'll advocate with them and on behalf of them, going from the micro level through the macro level. And what that looks like is if I have a student in my courses and someone else in my course shell has made a comment like, that is so gay, then I'm going to advocate on behalf of my LGBT student by possibly writing a discussion post that addresses how that could be offensive to another individual, particularly from this community. If I'm moving towards the macro level, at the school and community level, and I might do some systems advocacy, and this is pretty much where Lee and I have stepped in here. We looked at Walden, and I after the Orlando tragedy, I really struggled to find where I could send one of my LGBT students. Where could I send her for resources and support during this time? There was nothing that I could find regarding a Pride Alliance like I'd seen at other universities, or a safe zone training program like I'd experienced elsewhere. I couldn't find a list of faculty or anybody that would support this community, and I really struggled with that, and I felt like the conversations need to begin. So that's where I kind of put my advocacy hat on and started these discussions with Lee on what we could do, and speaking to leadership to see where under the umbrella of diversity and inclusion, where could we fit in and how could we address some of these issues. And then obviously as we move towards the macro level and look at the public arena, that's where we as faculty members can do research, we can reach out to legislators, we can influence policies, and that's where there can be a lot of positive social change. And I think a lot of us are already engaged in that, and I don't doubt that there are a lot of faculty that are already doing research that looks at the LGBTQ population. but it'd be nice if there was a better bridge between us where we could work collaboratively and see what others are doing and work together to advocate. So I wanted to bring that up because we're going to move into some role scenarios here, and I want you to think of yourself as an advocate and how you might respond in these scenarios.
Wonderful, Kathy. Thank you. And again, these are just role plays, and we just really want to get you thinking. And counselors love role plays, so that's why we wanted to make sure we got a couple in there to get you, again, feeling this in addition to just thinking about it. And as we kind of step into that ally role, hopefully as we start developing safe zones, we're going to have a lot of opportunities to really do that advocacy. So our first role play here is you are at national faculty meeting and you're having dinner with a colleague you've known for 3 years when she confides in you that her wife traveled with her and is waiting for her back at the hotel. She adds, "It's hard for me to be open with everyone, but I'd like for you to meet her." So what might be some reasons your colleague has never come out to you? And how might you respond to your colleague? And again, feel free to chime in. We're not on mute. Or you can type it in and I'll be your megaphone. All right, I see some comments coming in. Fear of negative reaction, changing relationship, okay. I would agree with that. I think that the experience of heterosexism and homophobia is quite prevalent, and fear would play into that, and negative reaction would be one that I would think that one would anticipate. And I agree, Christy, being happy to meet the wife. And I think it's important to consider as an ally being able to kind of meet the person where they're at. So they may have some feelings of discomfort, some uncertainty. So going back to where we were talking about, what is an ally? An ally is somebody who is open-minded and who is a friend, who isn't somebody who's a sounding board. So they may be initially a little uncomfortable, but being able to just be there in an open kind of way. And then maybe some of their fear of homophobia or heterosexist type of responses, some of those fears might kind of slowly be muted if you're able to kind of meet them where they're at and be non-judgmental and open. And Kathy's really sharing that when someone comes out, the other individual could feel scared, right, or shocked. So I think that for most of you that are here today, you're very interested in this topic. And so sometimes when another person, when a gay couple or a lesbian couple might share that they have a wife that's with them, a faculty member or a colleague might not have responded with shock, right? The look on their face may have been one of not knowing, right, or may have been one of uncertainty. And simply that facial expression or that kind of confused look, that alone could make someone who's already experienced a great deal of heterosexist comment or homophobia may be a place for us to all kind of work in being, watching our kind of facial expressions, our way of responding to people sharing about themselves. Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. So I'm going to move forward unless there's any other comments. All right, so the next role play is that a male student who you have known as Michael in your class approaches you at residency 2 and asks, instead of calling him Michael, you refer to him as Michelle from now on. He confides that he is undergoing the final stages of his transgender transition and would like to be known as his true self and not the man he's pretended to be for so long. So the questions are, how might you respond to your student, and in what way might you advocate with the student at a micro level? And this is also where I would encourage you, for those of you that are relatively new to learning about some of this, to do some research, learn some more about the terminology, learn maybe a little bit more how to use pronouns and adjectives. I would let the student know that I was happy for him and use Michelle from then on out. Wonderful, Julie. Thank you for sharing. And also using the pronoun she, or talking with the student if that's the pronoun that they wanted to use, or how they wanted to be referenced in regards to pronouns or adjectives. Just one more person is commenting. Any questions that are kind of coming up for you as we're doing these role plays? Ask if Michelle would like the rest of the class. That's great. And I think that's, asking the class and encourage the student to call her Michelle as well. I think that's really the advocacy piece, Hillary. That's great. Is really speaking to, how can you help them in that kind of that moment of residency, right? To encourage them to feel safe in that dynamic that they're currently in. And so that advocacy piece, for me as a faculty member, and I think for those of us that work here at Walden, is really finding what's working well for the student, how can they be successful here in the moment. And that's what Safe Zone is about. So how can we have them feel safe in the things that they actively have here in our university? How can we support them? How can we be that support person in the things that they already have and help kind of connect those things for them? That would be very meaningful advocacy. Thank you all for sharing. I'm going to move forward here. Kathy?
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, I'm briefly going to go over the ally identity development. For those of you that may already have some interest in becoming an ally, some of you may already be allies. As we get, this training completed today, or this webinar completed, I want you to know that we're really working towards continuing this with perhaps a series for a fuller, more comprehensive training to include, myths about the LGBT community, history, some of the language and culture of this community, because today is just a really big overview and it's a lot of information, and we don't have the opportunities to really dive in and explore some of our negative and positive feelings regarding some of these role scenarios. So I hope that we'll have some additional training and whatnot to become a Safe Zone ally. But as we think about ally identity development, I want to introduce to you some of the different stages. And I've put up 3 models here, and what you'll find is that they all have beginning stages, middle stages, and final stages in common. And so some of the things you'll see at the beginning stages is that an individual will decide to join an ally program like a Safe Zone program and begin to learn more about the LGBTQ community. Okay, so this is your entry, your awareness, your heterosexual naive stages. Okay, individuals may become aware of feelings of isolation and low self-esteem in their new ally role. Maybe This is where you'll see some fear of the unknown, some greater awareness. I know I can speak for myself. I certainly felt a little bit of that as I started, and I'm just going to share this. I'm a religious individual, and I found myself really struggling with groups of individuals that were of religious background and groups of individuals that I was working with on campus that identified with both their religion and their sexual identity as being LGBTQ, and it was just overwhelming for me at first. So I didn't know where I fit in, and I kind of struggled with that at the beginning. As you move forward with experiences and whatnot, the middle stages are where an ally might report awareness of their learned negative stereotypes, so they can begin to explore what factors really influence those stereotypes of the LGBTQ community and heterosexual individuals. So this is where your fear of the unknown, your heterosexual acceptance, your ambivalence phases kind of come in. Allies might feel increased support from other allies, and thank goodness for Lee, because we were in it together and we were supporting each other, and we had our one of our friends who was lesbian really encouraging us and appreciating us, and that just helped us keep doing the work that I know I had committed to do and continue to do. In the middle phases, allies can begin to understand themselves and thereby understanding other group members. So that's where you see the phases of acknowledgement of privilege. And allies become more aware of those privileges due to their membership in a potential dominant group. And again, not all allies are heterosexual, but the ones that are, this would be the phases where they can start to see that they really do have privilege, and that when they may have an opportunity to speak to someone that does have strong biases against LGBTQ populations because of a lack of education and awareness, that individual might be able to speak into them in a different way than someone who is a minority from this population. And then as you move into the final stages, these are characterized by advocacy. This is where allies begin to feel more comfortable with their self-identification, and that's your engagement phase. Allies might begin to feel increased self-esteem and empowerment to do research, to do activism. So that's where you see those phases. Allies focus more on their privilege and use it to influence and advocate for the LGBTQ community and their surrounding issues, thereby, bringing about social change. And that's where you see the empowerment phase, your heterosexual redefinition phase. This is also where allies experience greater congruence with their own identity and their new ally role. They feel greater connectedness with others, and they express pride in their decision to advocate for others. And I think that I've been doing this now for, 11 years or so, and I can tell you that some of these phases, I think, overlap a little bit, and sometimes you can go backwards, and sometimes you can go forward based on life experiences, because I know I've personally had times where I was really confronted with just real negative individuals, and it was hard to move forward in some of these phases. But with experience and dedication and commitment and encouragement from others in the group, I mean, that helped tremendously. Any questions so far on what being an ally is and what this identity development looks like and what it can mean to you personally? Okay. Well, I've posted some resources for educators and our students on this list here. And moving past this slide, we also have 2 additional slides with just references for those of you, and they're included in the PowerPoint at the bottom right file. But at this point, I'd like to open it up for any additional questions or discussions that you would feel would be helpful.
I just want to encourage all of you that are really interested in this and continuing the safe zone discussion and being part of the LGBT community and the ally community to really stay in touch with Kathy and I, because we really are continuing this. So this isn't something that we're just doing one training today. We really are working to continue to do this. So I see that as one of the ongoing questions. We've reached out to leadership, and then we're also going to continue with CFE to continue the ball rolling. So essentially stay tuned and really stay in touch with us. So it's not something that I want to do in isolation, and I don't think, Kathy and I, we've spoken to the fact that we've done this together for a number of years. So we really believe in community, and we really believe in continuing the advocacy movement. So, please, if you're interested, please really, stay connected to us and keep your eyes open for additional training and additional kind of information.
And Hillary, I do see your comment. Soon. And I say soon because we have all the materials needed, and we've actually drafted a manual. The only thing is that as I think about Safe Zone at Walden and look at the bigger picture, I think we need to fall under an umbrella. And even though Walden doesn't have, an office of multicultural affairs or what you would see at normal brick and mortar schools, I think there's opportunity there for groups and leadership that are already working on inclusion and diversity issues for this to be tied in. And the other thing too is I think there needs to be input from a group of individuals, whether it's an advisory council or committee, to really inform and have overview over what a training manual would look like. Even though I've gone through the train the trainer trainings and I can do the training, I just think Walden as a whole, it should have individuals that are really invested and interested in this come together, collaborate together, and oversee it. And so we're ready to go. We have the manual drafted, we have the resources, we have tons of references and wonderful material, but I don't want to do it in isolation. So I don't know when that next training is going to happen, but we're ready, and we're ready to create a series and do whatever we need to do to advocate. Any other questions? I see you typing, Shayna. And I just wanted to thank everyone again for being here and sharing this time with us. I know that it could have been more in-depth and we could have really explored deeper, but like I said, this is just introductory. We want to see who's interested and where we can get started. And I appreciate all of you taking the time to be here today.
And thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Lee. This has been wonderful, and yes, we are very excited to collaborate and develop most likely a MyLearn module in the upcoming months, so please keep a watch out for that. I'm sure we'll have some messaging in our CFE newsletter. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate the information that you presented. I have put a link to a survey. If you could all just take a moment to fill out the survey. It'll also open up as soon as I close out the room. If you could take a moment, we really value your feedback, and Kathy and Lee would really appreciate some information on maybe some content that you think might be pertinent in some upcoming trainings. So thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.